She went into labor, and the doctor was her ex-husband. Hello, let's hear another incredible story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I love narrating stories for you, so get ready. Let's start. The lightning split the Atlanta sky like a jagged scar, illuminating the downtown streets in harsh white flashes. Janelle Morris pressed her palm against the rain-streaked window of her studio apartment, watching the storm rage beyond the glass. Thunder rolled overhead, a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones, or maybe that was something else entirely. She'd been having contractions for the past hour, each one stronger than the last. The tightening sensation wrapped around her belly like an invisible fist, squeezing until she had to grip the windowsill and breathe through pursed lips. At 32, Janelle had photographed dozens of births, captured those first moments of life through her lens. But experiencing it herself was entirely different, raw, primal, terrifying. The apartment felt smaller tonight, shadows dancing in the corners as another flash of lightning carved through the darkness. Her camera equipment stood silent on the dining table. Lenses, tripods, and memory cards that held fragments of other people's joy. Tonight, she was creating her own story, one she'd chosen to write alone. Another contraction hit, this one forcing her to double over. She counted the seconds, 45, 50, nearly a minute of pressure that made her vision blur at the edges. When it passed, she straightened slowly, one hand supporting her lower back, the other cradling her swollen belly. "Okay, little one," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I think it's time." The decision to have this baby alone hadn't been easy, but it had been hers. After years of building her photography business from nothing, of learning to rely on herself and no one else, Janelle had finally reached a place where she felt strong enough to be a mother. The father, a brief relationship that had burned bright and fast, didn't even know about the pregnancy. She'd made that choice deliberately, wanting to protect this new life from the complications of adult mistakes. Her overnight bag sat by the door, packed for weeks. Inside, comfortable clothes, toiletries, the little yellow onesie she'd bought when she first found out she was having a baby. Yellow because she'd wanted to be surprised, to meet her child without preconceptions or expectations, just pure, unfiltered love. The rain hammered against the windows as another contraction built, this one making her gasp and reach for the wall. They were coming faster now, maybe 5 minutes apart. Her birthing class instructor had said to head to the hospital when they were consistently 4 minutes apart, but something told her not to wait much longer. Janelle gathered her keys and bag, pausing at the mirror by the door. Her reflection showed a woman she barely recognized, face flushed, hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark eyes wide with a mixture of anticipation and fear. She looked younger than her 32 years, but also older, as if this moment was aging her in real time. "You've got this," she told her reflection, the same word she'd been repeating like a mantra for months. "You've survived worse. You can do this." The drive to Atlanta General was a blur of windshield wipers and red brake lights. Each contraction forced her to pull over, breathing through the pain while cars splashed past in the storm. By the time she reached the hospital's emergency entrance, her hands were shaking and her shirt was soaked with sweat despite the air conditioning. The automatic doors slid open, and she stumbled into the bright fluorescent lighting of the lobby. The contrast from the dark storm outside was jarring, making her squint as a wave of pain rolled through her midsection. "And I need," she started to say to the receptionist, but her words were cut off by another contraction, this one strong enough to drop her to her knees. Suddenly there were hands on her arms, voices calling for a wheelchair, the efficient chaos of medical professionals taking control. She was lifted, wheeled through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax, past rooms where other stories were unfolding, some ending, some just beginning. "What's your name, honey?" A nurse with kind eyes and silver hair was walking beside the wheelchair, clipboard in hand. "Janelle Morris," she managed between pants. 32 years old, first baby. How far apart are your contractions? 3 minutes, maybe less. The words came out in a rush as another wave hit. It's happening fast. The elevator dinged, and they rushed toward the obstetrics wing. Through the windows, Janelle could see the storm still raging outside, lightning continuing to slice through the darkness. It felt symbolic somehow, as if the weather was reflecting the tumultuous change happening inside her body. They wheeled her into a delivery room just as the lights flickered, once, twice, then went out completely, leaving them in the dim emergency lighting that cast long shadows across the walls. "The power's out in this section," someone called from the hallway. Storm took out a transformer. "Do we have backup?" The silver-haired nurse, her name tag read Patricia, was checking monitors, adjusting equipment. "Partially, Dr. Stevens is stuck in surgery. We're down to minimal staff." Another contraction hit, this one so intense that Janelle cried out, her hands gripping the bed rails. She could feel the baby moving lower, the pressure building to an almost unbearable degree. "We need a doctor," Patricia called urgently. "This baby isn't waiting." Footsteps in the hallway, quick and purposeful. The door opened, and a tall figure in scrubs entered, moving with the confident stride of someone accustomed to emergency situations. Janelle's vision was blurry with pain and effort, but something about the silhouette seemed familiar. "What do we have?" The voice was deep, professional, tinged with the kind of calm authority that comes from years of experience. Patricia rattled off numbers: dilation, contractions, fetal heart rate, while Janelle tried to focus on breathing. The pressure was overwhelming now, her body taking over with an ancient rhythm she couldn't control. "Ma'am, I need you to look at me." The doctor moved closer, and in the dim emergency lighting, their eyes met. Time stopped. It was Marcus, Dr. Marcus Reed, her ex-husband, standing there in surgical scrubs with the same intense brown eyes that had once looked at her with love, then later with devastating grief, and finally with the cold distance that had ended their marriage 4 years ago. For a moment, neither of them moved. The storm outside seemed to pause, the pain in her body faded to background noise, and all she could hear was the thundering of her own heartbeat. Janelle. Her name on his lips was barely a whisper, filled with shock and something else she couldn't identify. But before either of them could process the impossibility of this moment, another contraction seized her body, and she cried out, her head falling back against the pillow. There was no time for explanations, no time for the 1,000 questions that hung in the air between them. Her baby was coming, and Marcus, Dr. Reed, was the only one who could help bring this new life safely into the world. "I need to examine you," he said, his voice becoming purely clinical, the professional mask sliding into place. "Can you do that for me?" Janelle nodded, tears she didn't understand streaming down her cheeks, whether they were from pain, shock, or something deeper, she couldn't say. All she knew was that the man she'd once loved more than life itself was here, in this moment, when she needed him most. And despite everything that had broken between them, despite the years of silence and hurt, she trusted him completely with the most precious thing she'd ever carried. "Okay," she whispered, meeting his eyes one more time before another wave of pain pulled her under. "Let's bring my baby home." The delivery room hummed with controlled urgency under the dim emergency lighting. Marcus moved with the practiced precision that had defined his career, but his hands trembled slightly as he snapped on latex gloves. 15 years of delivering babies, and he'd never felt his composure crack like this. "Patricia, I need better lighting," he called, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. "And check fetal heart rate every 2 minutes." Janelle gripped the bed rails, her knuckles white against the metal. Between contractions, her eyes found his, those same dark eyes that had once looked at him with such love, such trust. Now they held pain, confusion, and something else he couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe, or recognition of how impossible this moment was. "Dr. Reed," Patricia's voice cut through his thoughts. "She's fully dilated. Baby's crowning. He positioned himself at the foot of the bed, forcing himself into the mental space he'd occupied thousands of times before. This was just another delivery, another mother bringing life into the world, except it wasn't, and they both knew it. "Janelle, I need you to listen to me." His voice dropped to the calm, authoritative tone that had guided countless women through this moment. "On the next contraction, I want you to push. Not too hard, let your body guide you." She nodded, sweat beading on her forehead. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, and he recognized the signs of someone fighting panic alongside pain. "Look at me," he said, waiting until her eyes met his. "You've got this, just like you always did. You're stronger than you know." The words slipped out before he could stop them, too personal for this sterile room, too heavy with history, but they seemed to ground her. Her breathing slowed, and when the next contraction came, she bore down with focused determination. "That's it," he encouraged, professional again. "I can see the head, dark hair, just like—" He caught himself, jaw tightening. One more like that. The storm outside seemed to intensify, thunder rolling overhead like an ominous soundtrack. Emergency lighting flickered, casting moving shadows across the walls. In the chaos of the moment, Marcus found himself remembering another night, another storm, when he'd held Janelle as she grieved the loss of their first child, when words had failed them both, and silence had grown into an insurmountable wall. "Dr. Reed." Patricia's voice was urgent, heart rates dropping. Marcus refocused instantly, the past dissolving into present crisis. The baby's shoulder was caught, a common but potentially dangerous complication. His hands moved automatically, years of training taking over. "Janelle, I need you to stop pushing for a moment," he said, his tone commanding but gentle. "Let me help the baby." She pressed her lips together, tears streaming down her face. Not just from pain now, but from trust. She was trusting him with the most precious thing in her world, the child she'd carried alone, protected alone, prepared to raise alone. His hands worked carefully, guiding the baby's shoulder free. "Okay, one more push. This is it." Janelle drew a deep breath, her eyes never leaving his face, and pushed with everything she had left. The baby slipped into Marcus's waiting hands, a perfect, slippery, purple-tinged little girl who immediately began to wail with impressive volume. "Oh, she's beautiful," Patricia breathed, but Marcus was already moving, clearing the baby's airway, checking reflexes, counting fingers and toes with the automatic precision of experience. "Is she—" Janelle's voice was barely a whisper. "She's perfect," Marcus said. And for the first time in 4 years, his smile was completely genuine. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a very healthy set of lungs. He cleaned the baby quickly, then hesitated. Hospital protocol dictated that he should hand her to Patricia, who would then place her on Janelle's chest, but something made him pause. This tiny life cradled in his hands, her dark eyes so much like her mother's, blinking up at him with newborn wonder. "Here's your daughter," he said softly, placing the baby directly on Janelle's chest. The moment their skin touched, something shifted in the room. Janelle's face transformed, pain giving way to wonder, exhaustion melting into pure, overwhelming love. She looked down at her daughter with an expression Marcus remembered from their early days together, the same look she'd given him when she'd agreed to marry him, when she'd believed they could conquer anything together. "Hello, little love," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." The baby quieted at her mother's voice, tiny fist curling around Janelle's finger. Marcus watched the interaction, something tight and painful expanding in his chest. This should have been their moment, his and Janelle's, welcoming their child together. Instead, he was just the doctor who'd happened to be on duty, a professional observer to someone else's miracle. "What's her name?" Patricia asked, preparing the birth certificate paperwork. Janelle looked up at Marcus, and for a moment, time seemed suspended. "Aria," she said finally. "Aria Grace Morris." The middle name hit him like a physical blow. Grace had been his mother's name, a detail Janelle couldn't have forgotten. Whether it was coincidence or something more deliberate, He couldn't tell, but it felt like a bridge across the years of silence between them. "It's beautiful," he managed, his voice rougher than he intended. Patricia bustled around them, checking Janelle's vitals, monitoring the baby, filling out forms. The professional choreography of post-delivery care continued around them, but Marcus felt disconnected from it all, watching Janelle murmur to her daughter, seeing the way the baby's eyes seemed to track her mother's voice. "Dr. Reed," Patricia's voice brought him back to reality. "Everything looks good here. Mother and baby are both stable." He nodded, suddenly aware that his part in this story was over. He'd done his job, safely delivered a healthy baby. Now he should step back, let the nurses take over, move on to the next case. That's how it worked. That's how it had always worked. But as he moved toward the door, Janelle's voice stopped him. Marcus, not Dr. Reed, just his name, spoken quietly, but with enough weight to root him in place. "Thank you." He turned back, meeting her eyes one more time. She looked exhausted but radiant, her daughter nestled against her chest. Both of them bathed in the soft glow of emergency lighting. For just a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it might have been like if things had been different, if this had been their child, their family, their joy. "You're welcome," he said simply, then stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind him. The storm was beginning to pass outside, thunder growing more distant, lightning less frequent. Marcus leaned against the wall, still wearing his surgical gloves, and tried to process what had just happened. In the span of an hour, his carefully ordered world had been turned upside down by the woman he'd never stopped loving, and the child who should have been his. But wasn't, he reminded himself, wasn't his child, wasn't his life, wasn't his second chance. Still, as he finally peeled off his gloves and headed toward the doctor's lounge, he couldn't shake the image of Janelle's face when she'd first held her daughter, or the way she'd said his name. Not like an ex-husband, not like a stranger, but like someone who still mattered, someone who, despite everything, still held a piece of her heart. 3 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Janelle's apartment, casting long rectangles of light across the hardwood floors. She sat cross-legged on her bed, Arya sleeping against her chest, both of them still in their pajamas, despite it being nearly noon. These quiet moments had become sacred, the only time when the weight of single motherhood felt manageable, when she could simply exist without the constant mental checklist of feeding schedules, diaper changes, and the terrifying responsibility of keeping another human being alive. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, and she reached for it carefully, trying not to wake the baby. The caller ID made her stomach clench. Atlanta General Hospital. It had been 3 months since that storm-swept night. 3 months since she'd seen Marcus's face in the delivery room, and she'd almost convinced herself it had been some kind of fever dream brought on by labor pains. "Hello," she answered softly. "Mrs. Morris? This is Dr. Catherine Chen from Atlanta General's Genetics Department. I'm calling regarding some routine blood work from your daughter's birth." Janelle's grip tightened on the phone. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong exactly, but we've discovered something unusual. The tests we run on all newborns flagged some genetic markers that suggest—" Dr. Chen paused, and Janelle could hear papers rustling. "Well, it's quite rare, but it appears there may be a genetic connection between your daughter and Dr. Marcus Reed, the physician who delivered her." The words hit her like ice water. I'm sorry, what?" "These markers sometimes appear when there's a biological relationship. It's probably nothing. False positives do happen, but hospital protocol requires us to investigate further. We'll need both you and Dr. Reed to come in for more comprehensive testing." Janelle's mind raced, trying to process what she was hearing. Arya stirred against her chest, making the small mewing sounds that usually preceded crying. "I don't understand. There must be some mistake." "I'm sure there is," Dr. Chen said kindly. "These things usually resolve themselves quickly, but we do need to follow protocol. Can you come in this week?" Yes, I'll come in." After hanging up, Janelle stared at her phone for a long moment, her heart hammering against her ribs. The timing was impossible. She'd been with David, Arya's biological father, during the conception window. She was certain of it, wasn't she? Arya began to fuss, and Janelle shifted her to nursing position, her movements automatic despite the chaos in her mind. As the baby settled into feeding, Janelle closed her eyes and tried to remember those days 9 months ago. She'd been heartbroken, reckless, trying to forget Marcus by throwing herself into work and meaningless relationships. David had been a distraction, charming, temporary, exactly what she'd thought she needed. But there had been that weekend before David, hadn't there? That photography conference in Savannah where she'd had too much wine at the hotel bar, where loneliness had made her do something stupid. She'd called Marcus, her first contact with him in over a year, and they'd talked for hours, talked, and God, had they done more than talk? Her phone rang again, startling her. This time it was an unknown number. Janelle! The voice was unmistakable, even after all this time. It's Marcus. She closed her eyes, feeling the inevitability of this conversation settling over her like a heavy blanket. I just got the call from Dr. Chen. Yeah, me too. His voice sounded strained, tired. This is unexpected. It's impossible, she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she wasn't sure she believed them. There was a long pause, filled only by Arya's soft, suckling sounds. Finally, Marcus spoke again. Do you remember that weekend in Savannah? The conference? Janelle's breath caught. Marcus, because I do. I remember everything about that night. The memory came flooding back, his hotel room, the way he'd looked at her like she was water in the desert, the desperate way they'd reached for each other across the wreckage of their marriage. They'd both been broken that night, both seeking something they couldn't name, and for a few hours they'd found it in each other's arms. That was a mistake, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Maybe, he said, but if she's mine, then it wasn't really a mistake, was it? Janelle looked down at her daughter, studying the tiny features she'd memorized over the past 3 months. The dark hair that curled slightly at the temples, the way her eyebrows drew together when she was concentrating on nursing, the stubborn set of her jaw even in sleep, features that suddenly seemed achingly familiar. We need to do the test, Marcus continued. We need to know for sure. And then what? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. What happens if you are her father? You think we can just pick up where we left off? I don't know, he admitted. I don't know anything right now except that I can't stop thinking about that night in the delivery room. The way you looked at her, the way she looked at me. I know this is crazy, but don't. Janelle's voice was fierce, protective. Don't you dare make this about us. This is about her. Only her. Arya had finished nursing and was beginning to drift back to sleep, her tiny fist curled against Janelle's chest. Looking at her daughter, Janelle felt the familiar surge of fierce protectiveness that had defined her life since the moment Arya was born. This child was hers. She'd carried her, birthed her, nursed her through sleepless nights, and worried over every cough and cry. No test result could change that. But if Marcus was Arya's father, I'll meet you at the hospital tomorrow, she said finally. We'll do the test, get the results, and figure out what it means. Janelle, that's all. Marcus, just the test. She hung up before he could respond, then sat in the sudden silence of her apartment, holding her sleeping daughter and trying to ignore the way her world was shifting beneath her feet. Again. The afternoon sun had moved across the room, casting new shadows on the walls. Janelle's photography equipment sat in the corner, cameras and lenses that had captured so many other people's important moments. Births, weddings, graduations, family portraits. She'd made a career of freezing time, of preserving the moments that mattered most. But some moments couldn't be captured, couldn't be controlled. Some moments changed everything, whether you were ready or not. Arya stirred in her arms, dark eyes fluttering open to meet her mother's gaze. For a moment, they looked at each other in perfect silence, and Janelle felt the familiar wonder of being seen by this little person who depended on her for everything. "What are we going to do, little love?" she whispered. Arya blinked slowly, then closed her eyes again, trusting her mother to have all the answers, if only it were that simple. Outside, Atlanta hummed with the ordinary business of a Tuesday afternoon. Traffic, construction, the distant sound of a siren. Normal life continuing while Janelle's world balanced on the edge of a revelation that could change everything she thought she knew about her daughter, her choices, and the man she'd never quite stopped loving. Tomorrow, she would know for certain. Tonight, she would hold her daughter close and pretend that love was always enough to protect the people you cared about most, even when you weren't sure who those people were anymore. The genetic testing lab at Atlanta General felt sterile and impersonal, all white walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Janelle sat in the waiting area, Aria sleeping in her carrier, trying to ignore the way her hands shook every time she thought about the envelope that would soon contain their futures. Marcus arrived exactly on time, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfectly pressed shirt was wrinkled, his dark hair disheveled, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of long nights spent staring at ceilings and wondering how everything had become so complicated. He spotted them across the room and hesitated, as if unsure whether approaching would be welcome. Janelle met his gaze and nodded toward the empty chair beside her, not an invitation for conversation, just an acknowledgement that they were in this mess together. How is she?" he asked quietly, settling into the chair and looking down at Aria with an expression that made Janelle's chest tight. "She's good. Growing fast." Janelle adjusted the carrier slightly. "Protective. She started smiling last week. Real smiles. Not just gas." Marcus's face softened. "That's early. Most babies don't social smile until 6 weeks." "She's advanced," Janelle said, then caught herself. Was she being defensive about her daughter's development? And why did it matter what Marcus thought? They sat in uncomfortable silence. The only sounds, the quiet hum of medical equipment and the distant murmur of hospital life. Janelle found herself studying Marcus from the corner of her eye, looking for similarities between him and Aria that she might have missed. The shape of his hands, the way his eyebrows drew together when he was thinking, the stubborn set of his jaw that she'd once found endearing and later infuriating. "Ms. Morris, Dr. Reed," a lab technician appeared with a clipboard. "We're ready for you." The actual testing was quick and clinical. Cheek swabs, blood draws, forms to sign. Aria fussed during her blood draw, a tiny cry that made both adults wince. And without thinking, Marcus reached out to stroke her cheek with one finger. "It's okay, little one," he murmured, and Aria immediately quieted, her dark eyes focusing on his face with an intensity that made Janelle's breath catch. "She likes you," the technician observed with a smile. "The babies know good people." Marcus pulled his hand back as if burned, and Janelle turned away, pretending to organize the diaper bag she'd already organized 3 times. "Results will be available in 72 hours, the technician continued. "Dr. Chen will call with the findings." Back in the waiting area, they stood awkwardly by the elevators, neither quite ready to leave, but unsure what to say. Uria had fallen asleep again, exhausted by the morning's activities, and her peaceful breathing was the only sound between them. "Janelle," Marcus began, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I know this is complicated." "Complicated?" She let out a bitter laugh. "That's one word for it. I want you to know that whatever the results say, I won't try to take her from you. She's your daughter. You've raised her, you've—" "Stop!" Janelle's voice was sharp enough to make him step back. "Just stop! Don't make promises about things you can't possibly understand yet." The elevator dinged, and she stepped inside, Marcus following after a moment's hesitation. They rode down in silence, the weight of unspoken words filling the small space. It wasn't until they reached the parking garage that Marcus spoke again. "That night in Savannah. Why did you call me?" Janelle paused beside her car, keys in hand, Aria's carrier heavy on her arm. It was a question she'd asked herself 100 times in the month since, and she still didn't have a good answer. "I was lonely," she said finally, "and drunk, and missing what we used to have. What did we used to have? The question hung between them, loaded with 4 years of hurt and silence. Janelle looked at him, really looked, seeing not the ex-husband who'd shut her out after their loss, but the man who'd once held her while she cried, who'd made her laugh until her sides hurt, who'd promised her a future full of love and children and growing old together. We used to have everything, she whispered, and then we had nothing. It didn't have to be nothing. Yes, it did. She turned away, focusing on buckling Arya's carrier into the car seat. Only when we lost the baby, when you couldn't even look at me anymore, when you buried yourself in work and left me to grieve alone, it had to be nothing, because something would have been too painful. Marcus was quiet for so long that she thought he'd walked away. When she finally turned around, he was still there, staring at the concrete floor of the garage with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. I was trying to protect you, he said finally. From me, from my inability to process what happened. I thought if I could just be strong enough, work hard enough, save enough other babies, somehow it would balance out what we lost. I didn't need you to save other babies, Janelle said, her voice breaking. I needed you to grieve with me. I needed you to hold me and cry with me and figure out how to keep living when our whole future had just died. I know that now. Now is too late. She got into her car and started the engine, not trusting herself to say anything else. Through the windshield, she could see Marcus standing there, looking lost and broken in a way that reminded her painfully of the man she'd fallen in love with, vulnerable beneath his confidence, human beneath his professional competence. As she drove away, Arya began to wake up, making the soft sounds that meant she'd be hungry soon. Janelle found herself talking to her daughter the way she'd gotten into the habit of doing during their long days together. Your daddy might be a very complicated man, little love, she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. And your mama might be a little bit broken, but whatever happens, whatever those test results say, you're going to be okay. I promise you that. Arya gurgled in response, and Janelle smiled despite everything, whatever chaos the adults in her life were creating. Her daughter remained gloriously unaware, focused on the simple needs of eating and sleeping and being loved. 3 days. In 3 days, they would know for certain whether Marcus was Arya's father, whether that night in Savannah had created something beautiful out of their shared brokenness, whether they would be connected forever by this perfect little person, or if they could go back to being strangers who had once loved each other with desperate intensity. Janelle wasn't sure which outcome scared her more. That evening, as she nursed Arya in the rocking chair by the window, she found herself studying her daughter's face again, looking for clues that might prepare her for whatever Dr. Chen would tell them. But all she saw was Arya, her baby, her heart walking around outside her body, the best thing she'd ever done with her life. The rest she would face when she had to. The rest could wait 3 more days. The call came on a Thursday morning while Janelle was editing photos at her kitchen table, Arya napping in her bouncer beside her. 3 days had felt like 3 months, each hour crawling by with the weight of anticipation. She'd been checking her phone obsessively, jumping every time it rang, her nerves frayed to the point where even Arya seemed to sense her mother's anxiety. Ms. Morris, this is Dr. Chen. I have your test results. Janelle's hands went numb, nearly dropping the phone. Okay, the results are conclusive. Dr. Reed is definitely the biological father of your daughter. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence of her apartment. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear traffic, the neighbor's dog barking, the ordinary sounds of the world continuing to turn while hers had just shifted completely off its axis. Ms. Morris, are you there? Yes, Janelle managed, her voice barely a whisper. I'm here. I know this must be a shock. Dr. Reed asked me to call you first, but he'd like to speak with you when you're ready. There are some legal considerations we should discuss, and I need to call you back, Janelle interrupted, hanging up before Dr. Chen could respond. She stared at her phone for a long moment, watching the screen fade to black. Arya stirred in her bouncer, making the soft, cooing sounds that usually melted Janelle's heart. But right now she felt frozen, unable to process what she'd just learned. Marcus was Arya's father, the man she'd divorced, the man she'd spent 3 years avoiding, the man who'd delivered their daughter without knowing she was his. He was Arya's father. Her phone buzzed with a text message. "Can we meet? We need to talk." Marcus. Before she could second-guess herself, she typed back, "My apartment, 1 hour." The next 60 minutes passed in a blur of frantic activity. Janelle found herself cleaning obsessively, as if having a spotless apartment would somehow make this conversation easier. She changed Arya's outfit twice, then changed her own clothes 3 times before settling on jeans and a simple sweater. Nothing too formal, nothing that suggested this was anything more than a necessary discussion between 2 adults with a shared responsibility. When the doorbell rang, she was nursing Arya on the couch, and for a moment she considered not answering. Maybe if she ignored this long enough, it would go away. Maybe Marcus would assume she'd changed her mind and leave, and they could go back to their separate lives. But Arya chose that moment to unlatch and look toward the door with curious eyes, and Janelle realized there was no going back now. This was their reality, whether she was ready for it or not. Marcus stood in her doorway looking as shell-shocked as she felt. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, shirt untucked, hair messed up as if he'd been running his hands through it, eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi." She stepped aside to let him in, hyper-aware of how small her apartment must seem to someone accustomed to his sprawling house in Buckhead. "Do you want coffee?" "Please." They moved to the kitchen with careful politeness, like strangers navigating unfamiliar territory. Janelle busied herself with the coffee maker, while Marcus stood awkwardly by the counter, his attention fixed on Arya, who was now alert and studying him with the intense focus babies reserved for new faces. "She looks like you," he said quietly. "Everyone says that." Janelle kept her back to him, focusing on measuring coffee grounds. "But she has your hands, long fingers, and that little wrinkle between her eyebrows when she's concentrating." Marcus moved closer, and she could feel his presence behind her, warm and familiar despite everything. "Can I hold her?" The question made her heart race. It was such a simple request, but it felt enormous. If she said yes, if she handed her daughter to Marcus, would that be accepting this new reality? Would it be the first step towards something she wasn't sure she was ready for? "Janelle?" His voice was gentle, patient. "I won't drop her." She turned around, studying his face. Despite everything that had gone wrong between them, despite the years of silence and hurt, she'd never doubted Marcus's competence with children. She'd watched him with his patient's babies, seen the tenderness in his hands, the way he naturally seemed to know how to comfort and soothe. Without saying anything, she placed Arya carefully in his arms. The change in him was immediate and profound. His shoulders relaxed, his breathing deepened, and when Arya looked up at him with those dark, serious eyes, something shifted in his expression. Wonder, recognition, and something that looked like love. "Hello, little one," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your daddy." The words hit Janelle like a physical blow. Not, "I'm Marcus," or "I'm Dr. Reed," but "I'm your daddy." Spoken with such certainty that it made her chest tight with panic and something else she didn't want to name. Arya gurgled and reached up with one tiny hand, grasping Marcus's finger with surprising strength. He laughed, actually laughed, a sound Janelle hadn't heard from him in years. "She's got a good grip," he said, looking up at Janelle with an expression of pure joy that took her breath away. "Strong girl, just like her mother." Marcus. His name came out sharper than she'd intended, a warning and a plea all at once. He looked at her, and she saw him register the fear in her eyes, the way she was holding herself rigid and defensive. His expression sobered, but he didn't hand Arya back. "We need to figure this out," he said quietly. "And I know this isn't what either of us planned, but she's here and she's mine, and I can't just pretend otherwise." "What does that mean exactly?" Janelle's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "What do you want from us?" "I want to be her father," he said simply. "I want to know her, to be part of her life. I want to help raise her." "And what about me? Do I get a say in any of this?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, looking down at Arya, who had fallen asleep in his arms with the complete trust that babies showed to people they felt safe with. "I was hoping," he said finally, "that maybe we could figure it out together." The coffee maker finished brewing with a soft beep, filling the silence that stretched between them. Janelle stared at Marcus holding their daughter, because that's what Arya was now, their daughter, not just hers, and felt the careful life she'd built for herself, shifting like sand beneath her feet. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Neither do I," he admitted. "But maybe we can learn." Outside, the sun was breaking through the clouds that had covered Atlanta all morning, sending streams of golden light through her kitchen windows. Arya slept peacefully in her father's arms, unaware that her world had just become infinitely more complicated and, possibly, infinitely richer. Janelle took a deep breath, tasting possibility and terror in equal measure. "Okay," she said finally. Let's try to figure it out." 2 weeks after the revelation, Janelle found herself in the most surreal situation of her life, sitting across from Marcus in a coffee shop near the hospital, discussing custody arrangements like civilized adults, while Arya slept in her carrier between them. "I was thinking maybe Sunday afternoons to start," Marcus was saying, stirring his coffee with mechanical precision. "Just a few hours, until she gets used to me." Janelle nodded, though every cell in her body screamed against the idea of handing her daughter over to anyone, even if that anyone was Arya's biological father. "She usually naps around 2, so maybe you could come over at noon, stay for lunch." It was a compromise, letting him spend time with Arya without actually leaving Janelle's apartment, without crossing the line into real shared custody. "Baby steps," her therapist had called it when Janelle had frantically scheduled an emergency session after Marcus's revelation. "That works," Marcus agreed, then hesitated. "Janelle, I want you to know I'm not trying to disrupt your life. I know you've built something beautiful with her, and I respect that. Do you?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended. "Because it feels like everything's been disrupted, whether you meant to or not." Marcus leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from their marriage, usually deployed when he was trying to find the right words to diffuse a tense situation. "I know this is hard," he said finally. "Trust me, it's not exactly what I imagined for my life either. But she exists, Janelle. She's mine, ours, and I can't just pretend otherwise." "Ours." Janelle tested the word, finding it foreign on her tongue. For 4 months, Arya had been entirely hers, her responsibility, her joy, her whole world. The idea of sharing that felt like losing something precious. "I don't want to take her from you," Marcus continued. "I want to add to her life, not subtract from yours." Before Janelle could respond, Arya woke up with the sudden intensity that babies seem to master. One moment dead asleep, the next fully alert and ready to engage with the world. Her eyes opened and immediately found Marcus's face, and she rewarded him with one of her rare, genuine smiles. "She likes you," Janelle observed, trying to keep the slight resentment out of her voice. It had taken Arya weeks to smile at Janelle consistently, but she seemed to have decided Marcus was worthy of immediate approval. "Babies know good people," Marcus said, unconsciously echoing the lab technician from 2 weeks ago. He reached out to stroke Arya's cheek, and she turned toward his touch like a flower following the sun. "Don't," Janelle said quickly. Marcus pulled his hand back. "Don't what?" "Don't make this about being good people or bad people. Don't make it about who she likes better or who she bonds with faster. She's a baby. She doesn't understand the complications." "You're right." Marcus's voice was careful, measured. "I'm sorry." They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment, the coffee shop bustling around them with the ordinary dramas of other people's lives. Janelle watched a young couple at the next table, holding hands across their lattes and gazing at each other with the kind of uncomplicated happiness she could barely remember feeling. "I have a question," Marcus said finally, "and you don't have to answer if you don't want to." Janelle tensed. "Okay. That night in Savannah, what were you thinking? I mean, really thinking when you called me?" The question she'd been dreading, the one she'd asked herself 1,000 times. Janelle looked down at Arya, who was now studying her own tiny fists with intense concentration. "I was thinking about the baby we lost," she said quietly. "It was the anniversary, and I was alone in that hotel room, and I missed him. I missed what we could have been." Marcus was very still. "You never told me you remembered the date." "Of course I remembered. How could I forget?" She looked up at him, seeing pain flicker across his features. "I called you because I wanted to hurt. I wanted to remember what it felt like to love someone completely and lose them. I was drunk and sad and stupid, and that's all it was. Nostalgia and wine." Janelle hesitated, because the honest answer was more complicated than that. The honest answer was that hearing his voice that night had reminded her of everything good they'd had together before grief had poisoned it. The honest answer was that when he'd suggested meeting her at her hotel, she'd said yes, because part of her had never stopped loving him. "Yes," she lied, "that's all it was." Marcus nodded, but she could see in his eyes that he didn't quite believe her. "And now?" "What is this now?" "This is us being parents," Janelle said firmly. "Co-parents, nothing more." "Right, co-parents." Arya chose that moment to let out a small cry, not distressed, just announcing that she was awake and expected attention. Without thinking, both Janelle and Marcus reached for her at the same time, their hands colliding over the carrier. The contact was brief, just skin touching skin for a split second, but it sent a jolt of awareness through Janelle that she absolutely did not want to feel. She pulled her hand back as if burned. "Sorry," Marcus muttered, but he was looking at her with an expression that suggested he'd felt it too. "I should go," Janelle said, standing up so quickly that she nearly knocked over her chair. "Yeah, she needs to eat, and I have a client session this afternoon." "Of course," Marcus stood as well, ever the gentleman. "Sunday then, noon. Sunday, noon." She was already gathering Arya's things, desperate to escape before she said or did something that would complicate this already impossible situation. As she walked toward the coffee shop exit, carrier in one hand and diaper bag slung over her shoulder, she heard Marcus call her name. "Janelle?" She turned back reluctantly. "Thank you," he said simply, "for letting me be part of this." The sincerity in his voice nearly undid her. For a moment, she saw not the ex-husband who'd shut her out during the worst time of her life, but the man who'd once promised to love her through anything, who'd held her while she cried over pregnancy tests and miscarriages, and the cruel randomness of loss. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "We're still figuring out what this means." But as she walked to her car, Arya babbling contentedly in her carrier, Janelle couldn't shake the feeling that they were figuring out more than just co-parenting arrangements. They were figuring out whether the love they'd once shared could survive being rebuilt from the ground up, whether two broken people could create something whole for the sake of the perfect little girl who'd brought them back together. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure, which was exactly why she couldn't let herself think about it too much. Not yet. Not when everything still felt so fragile, so new, so dangerously close to hope. Marcus arrived at Janelle's apartment exactly at noon on Sunday, carrying a bag that looked suspiciously like it contained baby gifts. He'd changed out of his usual button-down shirt into jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes look warmer, more approachable, less like the distant ex-husband, and more like the man she'd once fallen in love with. "You didn't have to bring anything," Janelle said, opening the door wider to let him in. "I know. I wanted to." He held up the bag with a slightly sheepish expression. "Nothing big. Just a few things I saw and thought she might like." Arya was in her bouncy seat by the window, batting at the colourful toys hanging overhead with the determined concentration of someone solving a complex mathematical equation. When she saw Marcus, Her entire face lit up with recognition and delight. "She definitely remembers you," Janelle observed, trying to ignore the small pang of something that might have been jealousy. Marcus knelt beside the bouncy seat, and Arya immediately reached for him with grabby hands and excited babbling. "Hello, beautiful girl," he said softly. "Did you miss me?" "She's been fussy all week," Janelle found herself admitting. "Nothing I did seemed to make her happy for very long." Marcus looked up at her, something unreadable in his expression. Maybe she was missing her dad. The casual way he said it, her dad, sent a jolt through Janelle's chest. 4 weeks ago, she would have bristled at the presumption. Now, watching the way Arya calmed immediately in his presence, she couldn't quite summon the anger. "What did you bring her?" she asked instead, nodding toward the bag. Marcus pulled out a small stuffed elephant, soft and grey with embroidered eyes. "I read that babies her age are starting to focus on objects, and elephants are supposed to be good luck." "It's beautiful," Janelle said, and meant it. The elephant was clearly expensive but not ostentatious, chosen with thought rather than guilt. And this... He pulled out a small board book with bright, contrasting images. "High contrast helps with visual development at her age." "You've been reading parenting books." "Obsessively," Marcus admitted. "I have 4 months of catching up to do." Something about his earnestness, the way he was trying so hard to be a good father to a daughter he'd only just discovered, made Janelle's throat tight. "You don't have to be perfect, you know. Being a parent is mostly about showing up and figuring it out as you go." "Is that what you've been doing? Figuring it out? Every single day?" She lifted Arya from the bouncy seat, settling her against her shoulder. "Some days, I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing, like I'm just pretending to be a mother and hoping no one notices." Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching the easy way Janelle held their daughter, the automatic swaying motion that seemed to soothe Arya immediately. "You're a natural," he said finally. "She's lucky to have you." "We're lucky to have each other," Janelle corrected, then paused. "I mean, she and I are lucky to have each other." But Marcus had caught the slip, and something shifted in his expression. "Are we including me in that luck yet? Or am I still on probation?" The question was light, but there was something vulnerable underneath it that made Janelle look at him more carefully. "Marcus, I know we're taking this slow," he said. "I know you need time to trust me with her, but I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. Whatever this becomes, however we work this out, I'm committed to being her father. What if being her father means dealing with me for the next 18 years? The question came out before she could stop it. What if we can't make this work? What if we just end up hurting each other again? Marcus moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same one he'd worn during their marriage, familiar and comforting despite everything. "Then we'll figure out how to hurt each other less," he said simply. For her sake. Arya chose that moment to fuss, the small cry that meant she was getting hungry. Without thinking, Janelle started to lift her shirt to nurse, then stopped, suddenly aware of Marcus standing there watching. "I should probably..." she began. "I can step outside," Marcus offered immediately, "or into the kitchen, whatever makes you comfortable." "No, it's fine. You should probably get used to this anyway if you're going to be around." But even as she said it, Janelle felt self-conscious in a way she hadn't expected. This was such an intimate part of motherhood, something she'd shared only with Arya for months. She settled onto the couch and positioned Arya carefully, trying to maintain some modesty, while still allowing Marcus to be part of the moment. He sat across from her, not staring but not looking away either, his expression soft with wonder. "Does it hurt?" he asked quietly. "Not anymore. It did at first, but we figured each other out." Janelle looked down at Arya, who was nursing contentedly, tiny hand resting against her breast. "It's actually one of my favorite parts of the day, just her and me, quiet time together. She's so peaceful when she eats." "She's peaceful with you too," Janelle admitted. "I wasn't sure how she'd react to having someone new around, but she seems to genuinely enjoy your company." "Maybe she knows I'm family." The word hung between them, loaded with meaning neither of them was quite ready to unpack. family. Not just a sperm donor or a co-parent, but family. Marcus, Janelle said carefully, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person you married. Becoming a mother changed me in ways I'm still figuring out. And you're not the same person either. We can't just pick up where we left off. I know that. Do you? Because sometimes when you look at us, I see something in your eyes that looks like hope. Like you think this might be a second chance for us, not just for you and Arya. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching their daughter nurse, considering his words carefully. Maybe I do hope for that, he said finally. Maybe I've never stopped hoping for that. But I also know that hope and reality are two different things. I know I have to earn any place in your life, not just hers. Arya had finished eating and was starting to drift off to sleep, milk-drunk and content. Janelle adjusted her shirt and moved the baby to her shoulder for burping. The domestic rhythm so natural, it was easy to forget how complicated their situation actually was. What if we just focus on being good parents, she suggested. What if we table everything else and just concentrate on giving her the best life we can? Together, but as co-parents, as friends, maybe, eventually, but not as... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Not as people who used to love each other so much. It nearly destroyed us both when we lost it. The blunt honesty of his words made her breath catch. Yeah, not as that. Marcus nodded, but she could see the disappointment he was trying to hide. Okay, co-parents it is. But as they spent the rest of the afternoon together, Marcus holding Arya while Janelle made lunch, all three of them napping together on the couch afterward, Janelle couldn't shake the feeling that some things were easier said than done, especially when being around Marcus still felt like coming home. 3 weeks into their careful co-parenting routine, Marcus arrived at Janelle's apartment on a Sunday to find her in tears. Not the quiet, composed tears of someone dealing with ordinary stress, but the raw, ugly crying of someone whose carefully constructed walls had finally crumbled. Arya was screaming in her bouncy seat, red-faced and inconsolable, while Janelle sat on the floor beside her, looking completely defeated. She won't stop, Janelle said without looking up when Marcus let himself in with the key she'd given him the week before. She's been crying for 2 hours. I've tried everything, feeding, changing, burping, walking, singing. Nothing works. Marcus quickly assessed the situation, then knelt beside Janelle and gently lifted Arya from her seat. The baby's cries immediately softened to hiccuping sobs, and within minutes she was calm, nestled against his chest with the trust that still amazed him. How did you... Janelle stared at them, her own tears starting fresh. I'm her mother. I should be able to comfort her. Hey, Marcus said softly, sitting beside her on the floor while keeping Arya secure in his arms. Being a parent doesn't mean you have magical powers. Sometimes babies just need something different, but I'm supposed to know what she needs. I'm supposed to be enough for her. Janelle's voice broke on the last word, and Marcus realized this wasn't really about one difficult afternoon. Janelle, look at me. When she finally met his eyes, he saw exhaustion deeper than sleep deprivation, a bone-deep weariness that spoke of months of carrying everything alone. When's the last time you had a break? A real break, where someone else was responsible for her and you could just exist? I don't need a break. She's my responsibility. She's our responsibility, Marcus corrected gently. That's why I'm here, remember. You don't have to do this alone anymore. The words seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She doubled over, sobbing with the kind of desperation that comes from holding everything together for too long. I'm so tired, she whispered. I love her so much, but I'm so tired, and I feel guilty for being tired because she's perfect, and I wanted her so badly, and what kind of mother can't handle her own baby crying? Marcus shifted Arya to one arm and reached out with his free hand to touch Janelle's shoulder. The human kind, the normal kind, the kind who's been doing this job 24 hours a day for 4 months without help. I had help. I chose to do this alone. No, Marcus said firmly. You chose to have her alone because you thought you had to. There's a difference. Janelle looked up at him through her tears, and for a moment he saw not the strong, independent woman she'd become, but the vulnerable girl he'd fallen in love with years ago, the one who'd been so afraid of being abandoned that she'd learned to abandon first. "I don't know how to share her," she admitted. "Well, I don't know how to trust that you won't leave when things get hard, because I did that before." It wasn't a question, and Janelle didn't deny it. They both knew that when their first baby died, Marcus had retreated into work and silence, leaving her to grieve alone. It was the wound that had never quite healed, the reason their marriage had crumbled despite the love they'd shared. "I was terrified," Marcus said quietly, his voice rough with old pain. "When we lost him, I was so scared that if I let myself feel it, I'd fall apart completely. I thought if I could just keep working, keep saving other babies, somehow it would balance out. I thought I was protecting you from my grief. But I needed your grief," Janelle said. "I needed to know that losing him destroyed you too, that I wasn't mourning alone. I know that now. I've known it for years, but I was too proud to admit I was wrong, too scared that if I tried to apologize, you'd tell me it was too late." Aria had fallen asleep in Marcus's arms, exhausted by her own crying fit. The apartment was quiet except for the distant sounds of Atlanta traffic and their own careful breathing. "Maybe it is too late," Janelle said, but her voice lacked conviction. "For us, maybe, but not for her." Marcus looked down at their sleeping daughter. "She deserves better than two parents who are so afraid of hurting each other that they can't work together. I don't know how to not be afraid. Neither do I, but maybe we can figure it out together." Janelle was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with the same intensity Aria used when trying to understand something new. "I have a client session next Saturday," she said finally. "A family portrait in Piedmont Park. It's important for my business, but I was going to cancel because I can't bring Aria, and I don't have anyone to watch her." "I could watch her. For 4 hours. By yourself. I'm a doctor, Janelle. I think I can handle one baby for 4 hours." Despite everything, she almost smiled. "She gets cranky around 3 if she doesn't nap in her crib, and she only likes the organic formula, not the regular kind. And if she gets fussy, sometimes singing Moon River helps, but you have to do it in a low voice, not 'I'll figure it out,'" Marcus interrupted gently. "Trust me." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning beyond babysitting arrangements. Trust me, the thing she'd been unable to do for 4 years, the thing that had broken them the first time. "Okay," she said finally, "but I'm leaving detailed instructions, and you have to promise to call if anything goes wrong. I promise. And you can't judge me for having a meltdown today. Single parenting is harder than it looks." "No judgment," Marcus agreed. "But Janelle, you're not single parenting anymore. Not if you don't want to be." She nodded, but he could see the fear still lurking in her eyes. Fear of depending on him, fear of being disappointed again, fear of letting herself hope for something that might not last. As Marcus prepared to leave that evening, Aria sleeping peacefully in her crib after a quiet dinner, he found Janelle in the kitchen washing bottles with mechanical precision. "Saturday," he said, and she looked up. "When you come back from your session, maybe we could all have dinner together. Nothing fancy, just the 3 of us. Like a family. Like people who care about each other figuring out how to make this work." Janelle considered this, then nodded slowly. "Like people figuring it out," she agreed. It wasn't everything Marcus hoped for, but it was a beginning. And after 4 years of nothing, a beginning felt like a miracle. Saturday afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows of Janelle's apartment as she gathered her camera equipment, hands trembling slightly, with nerves that had nothing to do with the upcoming photo session. Marcus sat on the couch with Aria, both of them watching her preparations with matching expressions of calm attention. "Her bottles are in the fridge," Janelle said for the 3rd time, checking her camera bag again. "And the backup formula is in the pantry if she refuses the breast milk, which she sometimes does when it's been frozen too long." "I've got it," Marcus assured her, bouncing Aria gently on his knee. We'll be fine, won't we, sweetheart? Arya gurgled in response, reaching up to grab at Marcus's nose with determined fingers. The easy familiarity between them still caught Janelle off guard sometimes. How naturally they'd taken to each other, as if some genetic programming had kicked in to bridge the months they'd missed. And if she gets fussy during her nap. Moon River, low voice. Marcus finished with a smile. Janelle, breathe. It's 4 hours, not 4 days. She paused in her obsessive checking, really looking at him for the first time that afternoon. He was wearing jeans and an old Georgia Tech t-shirt, more relaxed than she'd seen him since they'd started this tentative co-parenting arrangement. Arya was dressed in the little yellow onesie with ducks that Marcus had brought the previous week, and they looked like a father and daughter spending a quiet Saturday together. The normalcy of it made her chest tight with longing for things she wasn't sure she was ready to want. "Okay," she said, slinging her camera bag over her shoulder. "I should be back by 6. "Take your time," Marcus said, standing up with Arya still in his arms. "If the session runs long, don't worry about rushing back. We'll probably just hang out and have deep conversations about the existential nature of peekaboo." Despite her nerves, Janelle laughed. She's very philosophical about peekaboo, I noticed. Very serious approach to the whole concept." For a moment, they smiled at each other over Arya's head, and Janelle felt an echo of what they used to have. The easy banter, the shared appreciation for small absurdities, the way they'd once been able to make each other laugh, even during difficult times. Then Arya let out a small cry, breaking the spell, and Janelle was back to being anxious about leaving her daughter for the first time. "Call me if anything." "I'll call," Marcus promised. "Now go. Make beautiful art." The family portrait session in Piedmont Park went better than Janelle had hoped. The Hendersons were celebrating their 10th wedding anniversary with updated family photos, and their 2 young boys were surprisingly cooperative for the camera. Janelle found herself falling back into the rhythm of work she'd missed, the technical challenge of capturing light and emotion, the satisfaction of freezing perfect moments in time. But throughout the session, part of her mind remained tethered to her apartment, wondering how Marcus and Arya were managing without her. She checked her phone obsessively between shots, but no calls or texts came through. By 5:30, as she was packing up her equipment and saying goodbye to the Hendersons, her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "All good here." She napped for 2 hours and only cried when she woke up hungry. Currently discussing the finer points of tummy time, the relief that flooded through her was disproportionate to the simple message, but it felt like more than just reassurance that Arya was safe. It felt like proof that Marcus was committed to this, that he wasn't going to disappear when parenting got challenging. When she got home, she found them on the living room floor, Marcus lying on his back with Arya on his chest, both of them staring at each other with rapt attention. Arya was making soft cooing sounds, and Marcus was responding with equal seriousness, as if they were having an important conversation. "How did it go?" he asked, carefully sitting up with Arya in his arms. "Good, really good, actually. I'd forgotten how much I love shooting families." Janelle set down her equipment and reached for Arya, who immediately snuggled into her mother's familiar embrace. "How was she?" "Perfect. We had lunch. Then she showed me her impressive lung capacity for about 10 minutes before deciding a nap was more appealing. After that, we worked on her head control and discussed the philosophical implications of cause and effect via rattle experimentation." "Sounds very intellectual." "She's clearly gifted," Marcus said with mock seriousness. "I'm thinking we should start looking into preschools." Janelle laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuineness. "Maybe we should wait until she can sit up on her own." Details. As they settled into the familiar routine of early evening, Janelle nursing Arya while Marcus moved around the kitchen, starting dinner, she realized something had shifted during the afternoon. The hypervigilant anxiety she'd carried for months had eased slightly, replaced by something that felt almost like partnership. "Thank you," she said suddenly. Marcus looked up from where he was chopping vegetables. "For what?" "For today." for proving you can handle her, for giving me time to remember who I am outside of being her mother. You don't have to thank me for spending time with my daughter." The casual way he said it, my daughter, no longer made Janelle bristle. Somewhere over the past few weeks, she'd begun to accept that Arya belonged to both of them, that sharing her love didn't diminish it. "I know, but I want to—" She adjusted Arya's position slightly. "I've been thinking about what you said last week, about not doing this alone anymore." Marcus stopped chopping, giving her his full attention. And maybe I'd like to try not doing it alone. Really try, not just going through the motions. What would that look like?" Janelle considered the question carefully. A month ago, she would have had a detailed list of boundaries and conditions. Now, watching Marcus move comfortably through her kitchen, seeing how Arya reached for him when he passed by, she found herself thinking less about protection and more about possibility. "I don't know," she admitted, "but maybe we could figure it out as we go. Together." Together. The word felt different now than it had weeks ago. Less terrifying, more like a choice she was making rather than something being imposed on her. As they ate dinner, take-out Thai food eaten off paper plates while Arya slept in her bouncy seat, Janelle found herself watching Marcus when he wasn't looking. The way he automatically reached for Arya when she stirred, the comfortable silence that had settled between them, the absence of the tension that had marked their early interactions. It wasn't love, she told herself firmly. It was partnership, cooperation, two adults learning to navigate shared responsibility. But as Marcus made her laugh with a story about one of his patients, as he automatically cleared her plate when she finished eating, as he caught her eye and smiled when Arya made a particularly adorable sleeping face, Janelle couldn't shake the feeling that the line between partnership and something more was thinner than she'd thought, and for the first time in 4 years, that didn't terrify her quite as much as it should have. 6 months after that storm-swept night in the delivery room, Janelle found herself standing in the same hospital parking garage where she'd first confronted the impossibility of her new reality. This time, she wasn't alone. Marcus walked beside her, carrying a sleeping Arya in her car seat, all three of them heading to Dr. Chen's office for Arya's 6-month checkup. "She's gotten so big," Marcus marveled, adjusting his grip on the carrier. "Remember when she was so tiny, I was afraid I'd break her." "You were never going to break her," Janelle said, smiling at the memory of his initial nervousness. "But yes, she's definitely not that fragile little thing anymore." Arya had indeed grown into a robust, happy baby with Marcus's thoughtful brown eyes and Janelle's stubborn chin. At 6 months old, she was sitting up on her own, babbling constantly, and had recently discovered the joy of throwing everything within reach onto the floor just to watch the adults pick it up. As they waited in Dr. Chen's office, Arya entertained herself by trying to eat everything in the diaper bag, while her parents watched with the bemused exhaustion of people who'd learned that baby-proofing was both essential and ultimately futile. "And I have something for you," Marcus said suddenly, pulling a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket. Janelle looked at him suspiciously. "It's not my birthday. It's not for you." "Well, not exactly." He handed her the package, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "It's for both of you, actually." Inside the wrapping was a small silver locket, delicate and beautiful without being ostentatious. When Janelle opened it, she found a tiny photo of Arya on one side and on the other, an engraving that made her breath catch. A.G.M., our greatest collaboration. "Marcus," she started, then stopped, not sure what to say. "I know we're taking things slow," he said quickly. "I know we're still figuring out what this is between us, but I wanted you to have something that acknowledged what we've built together, not just as Arya's parents, but as us." Before Janelle could respond, Dr. Chen entered the room with Arya's chart and a warm smile. "How are we doing today? Ready for some measurements and vaccines?" The appointment passed in a blur of weight checks and development assessments. Arya performed beautifully, charming Dr. Chen with her social smiles and showing off her newfound sitting skills. When it came time for vaccinations, both parents automatically moved to comfort her, Marcus holding her hands while Janelle stroked her hair, working together with the kind of seamless coordination that had developed over months of shared late-night feedings and diaper changes. "She's perfect," Dr. Chen announced as they finished up, growing beautifully, hitting all her milestones. "You two are doing an excellent job." "Thank you," they said in unison, then looked at each other and laughed. After the appointment, they found themselves walking slowly through Piedmont Park, in no hurry to end the afternoon. Arya was alert and happy in her stroller, pointing at dogs and trees with excited squeals that made other park visitors smile. "Can I ask you something?" Janelle said as they settled on a bench near the playground. "And always, that night in Savannah, when I called you," she took a deep breath, fingering the locket he'd given her. "I lied when I said it was just nostalgia and wine." Marcus went very still. "What was it then?" "It was love," she said simply. "I called you because I never stopped loving you, and I was drunk enough to admit it. I was heartbroken and lonely, and hearing your voice reminded me of everything good we'd had before grief broke us." "Janelle, I'm not finished." She turned to face him fully. "I've spent the last 6 months trying to convince myself that we could just be co-parents, that we could share Arya without sharing anything else. But watching you with her, seeing how you've shown up for both of us even when I made it difficult, learning to trust you again. I think I've been lying to myself about what I want." Marcus reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing over her knuckles in a gesture that was achingly familiar. "What do you want?" "I want to try again," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "Not because of Arya, but because of us. Because maybe we've both grown enough to do better this time. Because maybe second chances are real, and we're brave enough to take one. Are you sure?" His voice was careful, hope and fear warring in his expression. "Because I can't lose you again, Janelle. I barely survived it the first time. I'm sure. Not sure it will work. Not sure we won't make mistakes. But sure that I want to try." Marcus lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "I've wanted to try again since the moment I saw you in that delivery room. I've been in love with you for 7 years, and becoming Arya's father just reminded me of all the reasons why." They were interrupted by Arya, who had grown bored with the conversation and was demanding attention with increasingly insistent babbling. Marcus lifted her from the stroller, and she immediately began her favorite game of trying to grab his nose. "What do you think, little love?" Janelle asked, stroking Arya's soft hair. "Think your parents should give this another shot?" Arya looked between them with serious concentration, then broke into one of her brilliant smiles, clapping her hands as if applauding their decision. "I think that's a yes," Marcus said, laughing. As the sun began to set over Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they walked home together, a family by choice as much as circumstance. The path hadn't been easy, and Janelle knew there would be challenges ahead. They would have to learn to communicate better, to trust each other with their fears as well as their joys, to build something new on the foundation of what they'd once had. But holding Marcus's hand while he pushed Arya's stroller, listening to their daughter's happy chatter and feeling the weight of the locket against her chest, Janelle felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of someone afraid to want too much, but the steady, grounded hope of someone ready to do the work of loving and being loved. Sometimes the best love stories weren't about finding the perfect person, but about finding your way back to each other despite the imperfections. Sometimes families were born not just from shared DNA, but from shared commitment to showing up day after day for the people who mattered most. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, a storm could bring you exactly where you needed to be. As they reached their building, Arya fell asleep in her stroller, exhausted by the day's adventures. Marcus carefully lifted her out, and Janelle watched the tender way he cradled their daughter, the love so evident in his touch that it made her chest tight with emotion. "Welcome home," she whispered, not sure if she was talking to Arya or to Marcus or to all three of them together. But as Marcus smiled at her over their sleeping daughter's head, she realized it didn't matter. They were home, all of them, finally and completely home. The end. Thanks for watching to the end. Did you like the story? Tell us what you thought in the comments below. We want to know what you think. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe now for more exciting stories you won't want to miss. Activate the bell to be notified whenever a new video comes out. See you in the next story. See you there.